flowers are from Catherine, who stopped by for a little visit. Almost nobody ever sees her much anymore except her husband and the people in the studio. We want to retell the story? I don't think it's necessary, is it? Okay, great. We'll discuss a story that well, you were here last time, weren't you? Yeah, okay. All right, we left off with Quill returning to his David after having defeated Havgin in the land of the dead. And he's back at his primary castle in Gorsed. And after the first course of a meal, he is told that if he goes to the top of Gorsed Arbeth, that he will have either a beating or a vision or something marvelous like that. So he goes to the top of the Tor, and it's very different. He does have an inner world experience, but it's very different from his first one. In his first visit, it was invitational. He wasn't really seeking to enter into Anwen, and he was invited by Aaron in order to do him a favor and to make up for the face that he lost. And I think it's pretty much the matter that with spiritual things, our first incident of the inner worlds, or our first brush with spirituality, is always that way. We're so deeply infused in our unconsciousness that we don't even know of the existence of the spiritual worlds. And then when it happens sort of as a surprise. So it's that, but when you once have a taste of that, it's not surprising that from there on in, that you're eagerly seeking. And so he's ready to take blows if he must, but he certainly wants the marvel. England is sometimes known as the land of the hollow hills. And this is probably a misnomer or a misunderstanding or a mistranslation. Probably it would be that it is something like the land of the focally interpenetrated hills instead of the hollow hills. Anything that has roughly the shape of a teepee or a pyramid has the effect of being a focus of etheric energy. Aha, you're able to make it tonight. So anything has the effect of having that increased energy, especially right in the heart of it or at the point. Some people have even photographed the effects of energy at the tips of pyramids. And this kind of understanding of being in an area of heightened energy and being influenced by it is not something that's really understood in our times. Some people actually do believe that the earth is hollow because of Admiral Perry and other people like that being near the North Pole and suddenly seeing things going on inside of the earth and not dawning on them that they might be picking up some interpenetration of the earth. They think it's actually hollow, and this was actually recorded. And these kinds of people, I don't know how to say it, they get stuck on these notions. They ignore arguments like the mass of the earth. which would certainly throw everything off in terms of astronomy. If the Earth were hollow, we wouldn't have the orbit that we have. And the fact that satellite photos show no holes in the Earth, such as the type that they're talking about, that you could take a whole armada into the Earth. I even met a German man that I think was a Nazi, but he was, there are a lot of them around. And he tried to tell me earnestly that he says, they have taken plumb bobs and they put them down into deep mines. And he says, do you know they're farther apart at the bottom than at the top? Meaning to say that the Earth is hollow and we're on the inside of it. I don't know what that does to the space probe. Sure, there may be something like an Agartha or several Agarthas. I believe all of those things. An Agartha is a belief that underneath the surface of the Earth is another whole realm. Some people believe that you can get all the way across Europe without ever seeing daylight. That if you know where all of the tunnels are, all the caves are, that you can take them. And Adam Blavatsky alludes to the fact that there is an Agartha as a library that's somewhere in the foothills of the Himalayas. You walk right past the right bush and you go into a cave, and it's normally protected by psychic means so that you would never notice it unless you were the right person. You can go in there, and that there is one book of one copy of every book that has ever been written on something spiritual, whether it's a scroll or a tablet or whatever they are there. And there are all of those things that come up from time to time about there being a South American Agartha, that you can go all the way from Venezuela to Peru underneath the mountains. I haven't heard anything about that lately. Again, Madame Blavatsky talks about that one. And there have been quite a few earthquakes since then, so that may not be true anymore. But at any rate, there may be catacombs and caves and things like that. There's no reason why there shouldn't be, but there certainly isn't a hollow Earth. The Tors were most likely something like pyramids. They were designed in a shape in order to bend so that the magnetic field of all of the atoms in the object, when being struck by a line of energy, get curved or get bent. The word pyramid means fire in the center, and that in the heart of a pyramid, that any energy flow, like the whole magnetic field of the Earth, would be bent, and it would produce a whirlwind or a vortex of etheric energy inside. In fact, no matter what they talk about, tombs, the Great Pyramid of Giza, it was a temple of initiation. All of those books, like Books of the Dead, are really books about initiation, and they're instruction manuals for what happens when you get into the if you get into the inner worlds, what to do and what to look for and to be prepared. So they were initiatory things. So if someone were sensitive, such as the Welsh were, if they got right up to the peak of the Tor, there was probably enough energy to put them over into the inner worlds. Very often, the people who were kings were bred for two reasons. One, for size, because size was very greatly valued, and it's something like Pat was talking about Hawaii, where the royal caste is often 7 feet tall and several hundred pounds. The ancient Welsh bred that their kings were supposed to be huge, very big people. And the other thing that they were bred for was magical ability or second sight, which to some extent still exists in some places like Wales and Scotland. And so being right at the point, or if there were a cave or a hollowed out tunnel so that they could get right to the heart of the Tor, they would have such an experience like that. Now it seems kind of odd. It seems almost like an extremist thing that he would either receive blows or see a wonder. What is most likely the case is that he would see both, or he would have both experiences. In the process of initiation, or any time one learns to take soul flights out of the body, what happens when you leave your body or you project part of your body out, you are unwound from the body and you actually do relive parts of your past. And it seems like blows because we aren't always kind people. And so that's all part of it. It's a necessary thing that if you're going to be doing soul travel, or if you need soul power to get behind the entities that would play with your consciousness, you have to have the strength to penetrate through any kind of distraction and keep your consciousness focused on the heart of the subject that you're trying to learn. And so when you leave the body, you assimilate as much of your past destiny as your character can hold on to, which is an act of consciousness and the ability to hold inward focus more than anything else. And that gives you the strength of character and the soul power to be able to see. So probably it's like an initiation where he first goes through the difficult part and then unwinds just as one does in death and goes into the inner worlds. The soul material in the deeper stages of initiation also becomes objectified in that it seems to be set outside of ourselves so that we can see it as clearly as an object outside of us. In the same way as we said last time that Havgen represented the dweller, or the lower dweller of the threshold, and represented all of the negative, unredeemed things of our soul nature. It's very likely that Ryanon, in this sense, represents the objectification of everything that is positive and good in ourselves. Now, this isn't just a morality play that we see what's terrible about us and what inclinations we have to iniquity or whatever our negatives are, and then we see an angel that is everything good about us. It isn't just a morality play to demonstrate to us, but that's part of it. It is, we have to know ourselves thoroughly. In order to function in the spiritual worlds, we have to work from our own consciousness. And unless we know ourselves really well, we can be led away by desires that are the wrong kinds of desires, or something that fascinate us but are to no positive purpose. So it's really important that we objectively know what we are, so that we don't see ourselves as greater than we are. We know what our strong points are, what we can rely on in ourselves, and that we know where our weaknesses are. So when they are on the top of the Torah, they see Ryanon. To get up there, it's probably likely, Glastonbury, for example, is a maze. That when you go up, you spiral back and forth, and you go up using the same spiral pattern in the maze that is in ancient Greek mazes, or that are in mazes in other parts of the world. And it has something to do, I believe, with the focus of consciousness as is built right into all of our bodies, especially the physical body. It's a spiraling kind of back and forth, and it is a reproduction of the spiral path of evolution so that we undo what we have done in order to get back to the source or to get back to the origin. There are towers all over. If you remember when we told the story of Perseus and Danae, it was prophesied that she would have a child that would kill his own grandfather, I believe it was. And so he put her into a tower, and the tower was like the Tower of Pisa, one of those round towers, only the tower that Pisa leans, that has just one hole in the top. And those were astrological observatories. And they had staircases around the inner side of the wall, so that when you were rising to the top of the tower, it was like you were always turning to the right to rise, and you were always turning to the left when you went down. And the reason for this is that there is a focus in our consciousness, so that when we open the vortices of the desire body, or even the seeming spinning of the chakras, that they spin one direction with a positive controlled consciousness and another direction with an uncontrolled consciousness. And so this was built right into the pathway climbing to the top. So they get up there and they see Rhiannon. And Rhiannon, as the guardian angel or the greater dweller, is an objectification of everything good that we have done, so that we live in our past. Our bodies are the result of repeated experiences and the consolidation of the essence of the experiences that we've learned, so that they're very, very highly efficient. And the same with our inner bodies. The guardian angel is the seat of our true spiritual nature, our individuality. Astrologically speaking, the opportunities to experience the personality and its self-assertiveness are indicated by Aries in the first house. But the opportunities to be in touch with our individuality, the divine part of us, which works in a different way from the self-assertiveness in the first house just loves personal challenges. It goes at things, and then things come at it. The seventh house, representing the individuality, has a quality that it works indirectly. When we're really functioning in the spirit, from the vantage point of our personality, it seems like our effect on the world is indirect, and that the world is treating us right, like God is in its heaven and all is well. If we enter into our prayers, our meditations, and we are continuously trying to unite with the Spirit, when we are then in our mundane activities, it seems as if the world comes to us. And even if there are difficult things in our lives, they're all right. And we have a feeling that they're all right because we're in touch with that more indirect kind of control of life. So it's not surprising then that anyone who tries to use Aries or first house approaches toward the individuality is going to fail, and fail miserably. So everybody who tries to capture Rhiannon or chases after her, the harder they try, the more she is able to get away from them. Probably, in the reality of most people, Rhiannon would not be visible to anybody but Pwyll, but for the sake of the story, I guess they put it in there that they were that clairvoyant that they could even see that manifestation. I don't know how to say it. Pwyll, eventually, he's still youthful, just because we're beginning on the path of initiation or on the path of spiritual seeking, and we're trying very hard to live with a different set of values and with a different attitude, doesn't mean we're there immediately. So he, at first, tries the same thing. He tries to capture her. And it isn't until he takes the admonition of Christ, and where Christ says, ask and it will be given unto you, that he makes contact with her. You know, his boldness and simplicity are still like the Aries in the first house part. Brought him to the door where he can knock at the door, but in order to get beyond it, he has to use the other the other admonition. He has to ask rather than charging forward or something. She, true to the nature of the Spirit, very gently rebukes him. The still small voice always does that. For me, it just makes fun of me right and left. But their meeting is very much a spiritual classic meeting. She lifts up the corner of her veil, and she gets a peek. And remember when we discussed Siegfried a few years ago, he gets one kiss, and that's it. The full union can't take place until much, much later. So all you get is a peek. And you know, you're not supposed to see the bride before the marriage is completed, until it's totally consummated, because otherwise that brash, egoistic personality would try to arrogate the character of the Spirit unto itself, and it would be unbelievably vain. So he just gets a little peek of the individuality. And when he does, the description, I think, in this little story is one of the best I've ever run into anywhere. When he sees her, he gets a sense of beauty of every woman and girl he has ever seen. Boy, if something doesn't describe the divine feminine better than that, you know, wow, that's exquisite. It's just fabulous that the beauty that rests in the feminine anyway, that isn't so jarring and angular as the masculine, all of those curved qualities of the feminine imagination, as that sense of beauty, to see that reflected or to state it as it is expressed in every woman and girl that he has ever seen. It seems at first too much like a fairy tale when she tells him right off that he is the only one she's ever been seeking. Now, that's not romantic mush. For longer than we can ever believe, from the very beginning, when our experience of form was something not much more than a snowball, if we were lucky, and all of the forms that we have taken, and the living forms as plants, and all of the feelings that we felt when we became animal-like, until the point where we can become completely self-conscious and have the first experience of the Holy Spirit, all that while that we have been building all of our bodies and perfecting them and bringing them through one experience after another, and so that the personalities of the different bodies become more and more perfected and adapted to more and more different kinds of evolutionary conditions that seem almost infinite. All that while the Spirit has been individuating and leaning toward its creations all along. You know, the God part of us wants us as much as we want the God part. And when she tells him right away from the beginning, you're the only one they've ever been in love with, you know, it seems, unbelievable that something like that could happen. But that's really what the truth of it is. The divine part of us wants to come into us and wants to express in us. It wants to be whole, even in taking on the limitations of the material personality, as much as we want freedom to fly into the spiritual worlds. Initiation, in its early stages, when we have assimilated enough of the soul material that we can stand it, we literally see the divine. And there is, in the initiate consciousness, no doubt but that a person is a god. Never again do they suffer from neurotic insecurities. If you look at the works of people, Max Heindel, for example, you look at his early writings before he received an initiation and then afterwards look at them, it's astounding the difference in character. So what we're talking about is a spiritual event or a spiritual process in initiation where there is no doubt about the fact that we are gods. It's also expectable that the first thing that she wants is commitment. When are you going to marry me? Twice this year I've heard those words from a couple different directions, man, and I backpedaled so fast that you'd never believe it. I think there's one more that's angling that direction, and I'm going to have to dodge one more time. There are no two ways about spirit. You cannot be a dilettante about the spiritual life. Either you are with the Spirit or your actions are construed as being a hindrance to it. The Spirit wants commitment. It wants complete union. This really, really is marriage. Will is ripe, and he's eager to commit. And I guess once you've seen the divine bride, once you've seen the pearl of great price, there could be nothing in the world that, nothing else matters anymore. Yeah, your food tastes good, and the sky is beautiful, and flowers are nice. But when you've seen the divine, you can't go for anything else. So he commits, and the time is again set for a year. Same term that Apollo had when he fought the Pythian serpent. A year. He had to go through another full cycle of growth. He's now had a taste of honey. He's lifted a corner of the veil. And now he can go through another year of trials and gain a whole new perspective on life before he's ready for the complete and total union. And in a year's time, the forces, whether they be solstitial or equinoctial, which is when most great initiations are accomplished, will be realigned in that position again, so that's possible. So there's more than one reason why the date is set for a year. When the appointed time comes, Will and his 100 or his 99 go into the inner world, but it's clear that Will is still too earthy. He has still too much of the swagger, too much of the overconfidence, and of course that personal assertiveness. And as a consequence, he gives away, or he forfeits, the thing that he wants the most, just by being too much the big man and being in a place where he can distribute largesse and all of that. He's had a touch of the spiritual world, but he still hasn't given up the attitudes of the outer world. As we said last time, in this outer material world, the dense physical, chemical world, form is the all. It is in the perception and in the perfection of form that things are proven. Show me. Proof of the pudding is in the eating. This is the world of finality. We know the truth by its perfection in the form. In the inner worlds, it's a lot different. The form is much more will-o'-the-wisp. It's changing and it's shifting. It's true. It's true to the character of the spirit that produces the form, but it isn't the be-all, end-all. It is the life that is important. That if one lives the life according to the truth of the living Spirit, that is where things are tested, and that is where things are proven. We have to consciously be in the Spirit. We have to put on exactly the right mood to express what the Spirit needs to express. It is life. It is living. We've talked about this before. We've said that the truth of fairy tales or of myths is in the moral, in the living part of the story. Will still does things on the basis of form. And one of the first trials is to get beyond the form. But because he hasn't done that, and when he sees Clud, he sees him as somebody who's asking him for his largesse, he's looking at the form. He's not looking at the inward spiritual nature of Clud, what his life is and what his intention is. And because of that, from the inner world perspective, he is subject to illusion. This is the big thing when we enter into the spiritual worlds. The biggest problem is illusion. We're always looking at the form of things, and we're not trying to look with the invisible eye, look from within our own being, because in our own being is the only way that we can see inside of the form, even a shifting form, a protean form that changes shape right before our eyes. The only way is if we are true to the life inside of ourselves, then we can see the life inside of the form, and then we're free from illusion. So each world, the outer world, has its own reality. You talk to materialists, and you start talking to them about psychological meaning, and you start speaking to them about the truth of the Spirit, and they say, yeah, but I'm interested in the real world. Because for them, the real world is this stuff. If you go back to some parts of the world, like India, which still has remnants of a very ancient kind of consciousness, this world is not the real world. It is the inner world that is the real world. So what Will hasn't learned yet, in order for the initiation to be complete, he hasn't learned that he has to go through a different set of values. He has to learn a different set of laws in order to function. So he's in a fix. He's given his word, and he can't go back on his word, so he gets put through one more year. One more year with the fact that the thing that he loved the most, he may have lost. And this brings up a really important interaction that takes place with the seventh house, even in worldly interactions, but especially in psychological, and even more so in spiritual. In Christianity, we are told to give our lives to Christ. This is probably the healthiest and most wholesome way to deal with the problem of self, with the problem of ego. That we change our focus from ourself to other. The seventh house represents other. And the process, the psychological process of giving things over that we see in an illusionary way from our personality, the process of giving them over so that they can be objectified, just as Ryan herself is an objectification of the divine within us, is called transference. It's a psychological principle that if we get things out of us and place them onto another, both our monsters and our angels can be seen in the person of someone else, and then we can deal with them and take back the responsibility, but without all of the egoism. It's a very healthy process. So Ryanan is a representation of the truth, but she also is the truth. She's like the living focus of the truth as far as Will is concerned. And so what he has to do is he has to transfer control from his personal being. And boy, letting go of control for a personal, like we really like our independence and we like to call our own shots. And it takes a great act of faith to transfer control to something that is marvelous as we think it may be. We still think we know better. That's that consciousness of ego. We always think we know so much better. So he has to learn how to do this, no matter how irrational it may seem, when he'd just as soon fight his way out of Heavyid's castle. She tells him, no, we'll set a date for another year. So he has to so thoroughly learn the lesson of transference. He has to listen to her when she says, trust me, that he has to give up the thing that now means more to him than anything else in the world. He has to give it up to Clud, who sort of represents something like a boogeyman that represents the remainder of his possessive desire. The basic instigation to evil was probably indicated by Havgen, but the residual greediness that still has not been transformed in him yet is probably represented in the person of Clud. So he's learning a whole new way of life. The more we give ourselves to Spirit, the more Spirit wants, until there's absolutely nothing left for us. It gets kind of frightening that everything has to go. When we give ourselves to the Spirit, it's not higher knowledge that causes us to do so, because we can doubt even higher knowledge. It's the Spirit itself. And it's our faith that grows. Truly, we do live progressively more by invisible faith. So Ryanan gives him a gift. The first time he got to peek under her veil. The second time she gives him a gift, which is a bottomless bag. And she slips it to him. And this is a symbol that we've looked at before. A few years ago, when we did one of our perusals of the myth of Perseus, we recognized that, I believe it was one of the Grey Sisters. I believe it was one of the Grey Sisters that gave him the purse of accommodation, such that whatever you put into that purse, the purse would accommodate itself to the size of the object. This again is the same symbolic representation. It is the imagination. If you want to see in the imagination something as minute as an atom or as a molecule, as organic chemists have actually seen, the imagination can accommodate itself to the minute. If it is an entire galaxy and everything that's taking place in that galaxy, no trouble. The imagination can accommodate itself to whatever. In fact, the imagination is so great that it is not even spatially limited. It imagines anything that is capable of taking any relationship in space. It's paraspatial. So he is given this imagination and another year. And obviously, what he has to do in this year is to learn to practice imagination. In this year, at the end of this year, he comes back with his men and leaves them in the orchard, and everything again transpires just as it was predicted. The first time it was Aaron that was doing the predicting, and this time it's Rhiannon that does the predicting. She says, well, you show up as a beggar and ask for only enough food to fill the bag. Now, what's really interesting is that when I told the story last time, I left out the most pertinent detail. And it was psychosymptomatic. The pertinent detail is that Will is to start poking food into the bag until almost all the food from the wedding is gone. And then about that time, Claude will ask, will that bag ever be full? And here's the detail. Will is supposed to say, it will only be full when a man who is in control of his resources puts both feet in, tamps it down, and says, enough. I never brought in the enough. And when I looked at that, it was, wowee. I have, as a symbol, I have the sun in the second house in Scorpio. And I have my own inclinations to greed. And I never say enough. And I didn't want to say the word even when I had to say the word, when it was part of the whole presentation. How we can forget something of that great of importance. So that's the way the story really goes. Will appears as a beggar. He has to be brought. He has to be humbled to the absolutely lowest level, so that he's a mendicant, a beggar, in scruffy clothes, and he has to appear before royalty, who are going to treat him like he's a nothing, that he's worthless. But he requests enough food to fill his bag, and soon all of the food of the feast is going into the bag. And Claude begins to panic, as greedy people do, or people who represent greed, and asks, will it ever end? And Will says the words then, only when a possessor of true dominion puts his feet in the bag, tamps it, and says enough. And then Rhiannon persuades Claude, are you the possessor of your dominion? This grand feast that's set before you, and put your feet in the bag and do it. But obviously, Claude, because he's a greedy materialist, the lower nature is like that, he's not a possessor of his true dominion. There's never any end to greed. You can always want one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. It's never enough. He doesn't rule his imagination. He is a possessor and possessed by his perception. There's nothing wrong with perception to eat up the external world as experience, but to become a slave of perception that you want. You want to attach to yourself the objects of perception, that greed enters in. What we see is what we want. Whether it is even sometimes to the mind's eye. If we see something and want it immediately, that's the perfect definition of a lust. I have to have it, and I have to have it now. We try to attach everything to ourselves, because being outer people have more things that we own or that are attached to us, the more we have. But only the person who possesses true dominion, the person who has the imagination that holds within it everything and that can interpenetrate into the life of everything, only a person who has such self-control over their spiritual faculty that they can take everything into it or create everything into it, only that person is free. So if we look at it and look at the life spirit as represented in the being of Christ, we are given freedom through Christ. And this is a freedom through the power of the imagination. The imagination to truly possess everything without possessing it, because it all belongs to Christ. If we are not fixated on the object, but if our consciousness is given to the creative activity of the imagination wherein that object is formed, or wherein the essence of the object is taken by perception, we are never captured, and we are free. We're free because we are in control of probably the most subtle faculty next to the will that is available to us. So this is the character of the life spirit, is just as Lao Tzu described it, that which does everything while giving the appearance of doing nothing. Obviously, if we have given ourselves the life spirit, even our selfhood, tonight, there's no way I can stretch this any longer than that if I want to. So, if we are in the life spirit, it is a quality of even our being. The idea of our selfhood is an object that is a conception of the imagination of life spirit. And with that degree of spiritual imagination, it really is he who loses his life shall gain it, and he who saves his life shall lose it. I don't know if that's the exactly right thing. And so I'm going to make amends for not having said enough by saying is reading a 7-line poem by David White. It's a poem that David White is a very spiritually inclined poet. I think most of us have listened to the tapes. And he has a very short poem here. He's a practicing Zen Buddhist. And he sits and stares at a wall, or he just sits. And he doesn't do it all the time, but on a regular basis he goes and has times that he sits, and things come to him. And this is a poem that he wrote after a sit. This came to him. It's called Enough. Enough. These few words are enough. If not these words, this breath. If not this breath, this sitting here. This opening to the life we have refused again and again until now. Until now. Really beautiful saying. He said, what's taking me an hour and 15 minutes to say, he says in a few lines. Enough. These few words are enough. If not these words, this breath. If not this breath, this sitting here. This opening to the life we have refused again and again until now. Until now. Beautiful poem. When he reads it, you just shiver. He's probably the best writer of poetry around. The symbology in parts of the story of Will is meticulous. It's really meticulous. So much so that when they have Clud in the bag and pull it over him and tip him upside down and tie it shut, and everybody walks by and kicks him or strikes him with a rod. They're calling the game Badger in the Bag. And if you remember the Once and Future King, the mandibular badger who God gave the exceedingly strong jawbone, and with that jawbone he can grab and hold on to anything, that happens to be a Taurus animal. And Taurus in the zodiac represents materialistic greed if misapplied. So the detail that's in the story, you think about those things and you just say, wow, how could people come up with that and do it all just so perfectly that it fits into place? The detail also that Clud is not killed is also important, because greed is an instinctual function gone bad, given power that it doesn't really need. It's just put into its proper place. If we had to, with our full waking consciousness, do everything by direct conscious attention, like breathing and moving the blood and all of the things that we do, we'd be in a horrible place. We'd be in a very horrible place. And there's nothing wrong as long as our instinctual qualities serve the Spirit. There's no reason why they shouldn't live. Because too much, if we try to control things by direct focus of waking attention, that's the stuff of neurosis. You know, if every little detail you've got to take care of, that's a sign that you're insecure. When you are full in the power of the Spirit, you can render unto the instinctual nature what the instinctual nature is meant to do. In the same way, it's important that Quill doesn't want to remain in the inner worlds forever and ever. He's not like the disciples at the ascension, at the mount, where they want to say, build us some tabernacles that we can stay up here. He realizes that he has things to do back in the world. So he takes Ryan on and goes back to the world. But things don't work out perfectly. As we recall, for 3 years, Ryanon is not able to have a child. And this is, for ancient people, a very serious matter. If a couple couldn't have children, either one or both or the union was really wrong somewhere. It wasn't just like a physical thing, like a low sperm count or a tilted uterus or something like this. This meant that there was something spiritually wrong. If you could not be fruitful, and if you could not pass the gift of life to another form, there was something radically wrong in your personality. Now, royal couples especially, this was the case. Because before the masses of people were advanced, royal people represented the whole people. People didn't have to be tyrannized into following a king or queen. They sensed the power in the king or queen. And that power was given to them, going all the way back to the days of Atlantis, when the lords of Venus and Mercury were here and set up a hereditary kingship and a hereditary priesthood, so that both the power to rule and the power to sensitivity were passed on. So if a king and queen could not produce an heir, that meant to the people that they themselves, that their society was effete. And the only way this could be changed is if it was changed at the head, meaning that the king or the queen had to be changed. And so they are saying, we need a new queen. This one's not bearing us children. Some claim that a relative or friend of Clud, or even of Heviad, put a curse on Rhiannon so that she couldn't have children. That's not true, because she eventually does have children. Other people say that the sterility was in Pwyll, and that somebody else had to father the child Pryderi. Some people even aver that it was Manawydan who married Rhiannon after Pwyll passed on. That doesn't make any sense either. Because the child looks like Pwyll, and because it isn't logically consistent that the character of Pwyll could not follow through or could not carry out in the physical sense. If anything, it was almost too materialistic or too much of this world. The idea that Rhiannon was cursed, if you look at it in another way, if you look at it with the psychology of rumor, it was a rumor that there was something wrong with Rhiannon, that she couldn't have kids. I don't like gossip, but I do like rumors. Gossip is an intentional disparaging of another human being, and that's never nice. But the idea of a rumor gives you more information than the news. The news gives you at best the facts, but the news can't penetrate into the more subconscious or the more unconscious part of things. But when people start spreading rumors, they're always embellished. To some extent, they're embellished by the personal desires of the person passing the rumor, and it gets tainted to some extent. But when a person is drawing from the subconscious, they're drawing from a realm that is connected. And very often, rumor gets at the truth much better than the facts do, because it knows what's going on in the subconscious or in the unconscious that is making the condition be what it is. So let's look a little bit into the character of Rhiannon and what is represented by cursed or uncursed, her temporary inability to carry a child. It's only temporary because, as we remember, in given that extra year, the fourth year, the first three are always for the spirit. The 3 is the spiritual number, and the 4th is the material. But in that 4th year, she does bear a child, and the pregnancy is a pretty hard thing to hide, so it had to have been her that was pregnant. And so let's look a little bit. We started talking last time about 2 types of consciousness, the outer world consciousness and the inner world consciousness. And I want to go back to that, and I want to go back to it in a different way by looking at the situation of Rhiannon. In all 4 of the Mabinogi, one of the common themes is that a bride is passed back and forth. In Pwyll, the story that we're looking at now, 2 brides are passed back and forth. First, the bride or the wife of Aran is given to Pwyll, and Pwyll does not engage with her and then passes her back to Arwan. In the case of Rhiannon, she is passed from Pwyll to Clud and then back to Pwyll. So if Rhiannon represents the treasure, remember that we're dealing with a society that is a matriarchy here, and the highest value then is placed in the woman, and she is the jewel of consciousness, she is the jewel of society, and what we're talking then about then is the highest thing being passed back and forth. Last time we discussed the fact that Aran, even though he was the Hades, the prince of death, could not kill with one stroke Havgin. It took the objective certitude of the singularity of a single object that Will had learned in this material world to be able to deal the death blow that went right to the heart of the matter when he took the place of Aaron in the battle. So what we're trying to understand is the ineffectuality of Rhiannon to be fertile in the material world. We remember that she's capable of magic, and she does magic in the material world on a regular basis, but the simple thing of bearing a child is not an easy thing for her. Beside representing the guardian angel, or the alchemical bride, she represents the creative impulse of consciousness that goes from the inner worlds out, and then after the experience by perception passes back into the inner worlds. So this is the transfer of the bride. This is all of our life activity. To be balanced human beings, even to have the integrity of our soul's being, we have to have something coming from without meeting that which would stream in. If we have too much coming out of ourselves and are not taking in from the world, we waste and bleed creative energy out onto the world. And if we have not enough, the world collapses on us. We believe in a panic. We believe that everything in the world can get us and will. And then we just collapse under it like a tin can in a vacuum. We're crushed. And so Rhiannon represents that impulse of consciousness coming from within out and from without in. There is something about this world that we live in that in order for it to be materialized and sustained and transformed and evolved takes an enormous, enormous focus of consciousness. The fact that planets are being hurled through space as though they were spitballs with enormous power is nothing compared to the power that keeps the world condensed as it is into material existence. But when it is manifest here, it provides a limitation to further transmutation, because the same resistance that gives objectivity and faithfulness and durability that is sustained as an act of concentration resists the transformation. It's more than just an inertia, it's an inertia of a state of being. So that it's hard to penetrate. And our consciousness, being almost exclusively in the material world, it has taken all of our effort to externalize ourselves, and that's all we desire. We're like Clud. We want more and more in the bag all the time. That we have that kind of greed that we have a split in consciousness. And it is a split between the without and the within. We've talked about the split between the personality and the individuality. This split is more fundamental. It begins at the focus of mind, and it is carried to its fullest in humans into the physical plane. But the split is more than just a divided consciousness. It is how things are done. It is how things are accomplished. Things in the outer world, in the dense physical outer world, are generated, even if the imagination comes from within. Things in the outer world are generated by splitting, by breaking things apart. Cells divide. Growth is accomplished by a splitting. All knowledge is accomplished by a splitting between subject and object, which is so great with us that we think that there really is no parlance between us, and between us and the object of perception. And the sad part is that we think that reality is in the object of perception and not in the subject within our own being. Even procreation is done by bodies that are split into genders, each of which gives off, in effect, a half cell. This splitting means that all generation, because of the split, which is a deathly process that closes us off from the life that keeps things continuous, keeps things going and living, death is automatically built into all material creation. So generation, in the material sense, and death are part and parcel of the same process. It's not an unknown principle. Everybody knows that, what is born must die. And sex and death are part of the same function. We're saying that Ryanan represents the creative impulse that comes from the realm of imagination. And that her ability to be able to be manifest in the material world is limited until the fourth degree. Meaning this is another statement of the fact that what is in the spiritual worlds, the creators there can only work from the inside, and they cannot externalize in the same way that humans and animals do. And this is just a statement of reality about the nature of the way creative impulses become manifest, is that there is a limitation, that there is a split, that less than all of the spirit is carried into its creations. There's something very positive about this, because the death becomes an end. The form even becomes an end, so that to control our bodies, talking in the same way that Paul does, that there's another law that is in my members that is different than myself, and that which I would not, that do I, and that which I would, I do not. So that there is that struggle, a war between the inner and the outer that always goes on in this split. But the split makes for a non-attachment, and it makes possible the objectivity that was the objectivity for the one stroke of quill. So we're saying then that the limitation or the partial sterility of Ryanan is not a curse. The curse is a statement of spiritual fact about the ability of creative impulse to work into the external world. And so there is a true relationship between sexuality and the degeneration of form. It even acts to some extent in the psyche. Sex, as it has become in us, is a matter of lust, of pleasure, of something we desire. and we assert ourselves. And in asserting ourselves in order to satisfy our desire, there's something very repulsive, something very splitting. So that if one does not have the love that is represented by Raya, to enter into sex merely for sex, the sake of sex, to satisfy a lust, is automatically entering into a relationship that is going to have death and war and division and split right within itself. Only when they say things like love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage, that's sort of a simplistic notion. But the idea that there must be love, even more than the law, there must be love in order to hold together a union is a fact because of the splitting nature of sexuality. So it's really not a curse, it's a statement of the unknown. When the child is born, we know the story that the child is ensconced off somewhere else. This is not an uncommon story. We have everything from the lost years of Jesus to Theseus, for example, being raised apart from the court of Athens until he's in his teenagers. And it's a common myth that one who is eventually to come into power, male or female, spends many years in obscurity. Because in that obscurity, in that womb of not too great of self-consciousness, especially from the external world, the character can develop in a healthful way. There are two kinds of self-consciousness, one internal and one external. One very much to be desired, one to be eschewed as much as possible. In our society, we make a big fuss over our kids. They're not only seen, they are heard, and then some. And we cater to them, and we outwardly make a big fuss about them, and we call attention to them. And the consequence is egoism. It's a self-consciousness of one being on display to the world. And this external kind of self-consciousness is terribly destructive to the spirit. So much so that sometimes the spirit cannot continue to exist in the physical body with an external self-conscious egoism. One of the common factors among many epileptics is the fact that they're tremendously externally self-conscious, and they're afraid that their appearances are not right for the world, and the spirit has a great feeling of inadequacy because it has too much attention placed on it externally. On the other hand, if we are aware of our true spiritual nature, if we are self-conscious of the ability of that which is in us to work through and accomplish, absolutely anything can be accomplished. And so if one is rising to the heroic state, the state between a human and a demigod, to the state of an initiate, one must be raised in obscurity. And so Pryderi is raised in obscurity without having all of this attention paid to him. And now that brings us to the lovely little story of Tyrenon and the fact that he loses a foal every May Eve. May Eve and May Day in England was called Beltane. It is now commonly famous for fertility rites and things like that, but there are still people who do go around giving physical blessings. They give May baskets, they hang them on the doorknob and ring the bell and run off, and there are still people that do the spiral dance around the maypole. So it was seen as a celebration of the return of the fertile season. And it was symbolized by the Jack in the Green, a young man that was dressed in the green, and he sort of popped out and climbed up. It's where the story of Jack and the Beanstalk is associated with it. And he eventually wins the Queen of May, which is Maya herself, the Pleiade that symbolized the coming of spring, the divine being that brought on her trail, she brought the warm weather and the fertility. And of course, they did all of those things like young men and young women would roll naked down the hill in the fresh dew after May Eve, and that sort of looked forward to the dew is distilled water. It used to be collected. The Greek priests used to collect it for their magical rites. When they made potions and things like that, they would have young virgin girls go out on the first night after the first full moon after the summer solstice and collect dew off of plants, so that they would have purest water possible for probably more than holy water. But at any rate, these were things that were celebrated at Beltane. But there was another darker side to it. There was the May cake. And the May cake had a burned section in it, which indicated the imperfection. This earth really is, the continents are slag. Compared to the core of the earth, the continents are slag. If you ever read, there's one of the most famous doctoral theses ever written. It's just a real little tiny thesis. You probably read it, haven't you, Tim? The one about the geochemistry, about how the earth was formed in the nebula, how it began as a small, and that the quartz acted as the flux, and that all of the silicon aluminum as a slag came to the surface of the earth. But the earth, as we know the earth, is sort of like a cinder compared to the spiritual worlds. And the May cake had one burnt area in it. And people drew pieces of cake. And the person who drew the burnt piece was shunned. For an entire year, that person was shunned as if dead. Can you imagine that? Nobody would admit to the fact that you even existed. Now, at first, all of this seems terribly cruel and inhuman. But if we think back to Quill, how did this story begin? He lived 1 year as though dead. And nobody could see him for himself as he actually was. This is a perfect preparation for one who is trying to downplay the effect of the ego, that ego which must eventually be given over to the bride from heaven. So what we're talking about here is a death of personal existence. This is a year of preparation where one is set aside to live inwardly without distraction, without attachment, without having to please or displease anyone in the external year. This was probably a horse cult. The spirited horse, probably going all the way back to several thousand years BC to when the equinox was precessing through Gemini. And the esoteric schools were then the horse cults, going all the way back to the time when the Rig Veda was being written. Each year, a new king was chosen. And like Quill, this the whole story is the story of the initiation of the king. And the Pridary is the coming new king, the replacement for Quill. So each year the new king is chosen, and he's sent to live for 1 year in the realm of the dead. In the physical world, it's shunning, but in reality, it is entering into the time of Anwen for the period of time equal to a year. After a year, he is kissed and he's raised from the dead, and because he now has the creative potency, it's not restrained by egoism, he is now considered Jack in the Green. And he pops up, climbs up, and he wins the queen. And he rules for the whole year, but he must destroy, either in effigy or in reality, he must destroy his predecessor. We cannot have the past being too live. If it does, it overcomes us. The past, let the dead bury the dead. The past has to be destroyed. It has to be rendered in such a way that we draw out of it everything that can be drawn out of it. But if we let the past haunt us, that's the perfect description of neurosis. And so the new king, the new horse king, the new Jack in the Green, when he returns from the dead, at least symbolically, destroys the previous king and becomes king himself. So it's a kind of a patchy story, but even so, it's a really wonderful story of the cycle of an initiate king, becoming king, and then preparing the way for a new king. And Pryderi is closely associated. They make the point of that in the story, that Pryderi is associated with the colt, and he has amazing powers of growth. He's found in swaddling clothes, which is a mythical symbol I don't want to go into, but it goes all the way back to Egyptian mummies, and the way the lines of force in the ethers work their way into an infant's body, and into the way the lines of force are changed in focus in the initiate. But I don't know enough about that. It's too esoteric that I can't really talk about it. And he's called, for the time that he is being raised in seclusion, he is called Gwiri, golden hair, because he has a very special color to his hair, which again proves that he's a real king, because this was a hereditary thing. The kings of ancient Greece, going all the way back into Atlantis, had a tuft of purple hair, and somebody who was indeed of a royal nature, it was told in their hair, the character. So the so-called punishment of Rhiannon also fits. She is brought to the level where it is a perpetual confession, a confession of the inadequacy, the insufficiency of deeds in the material world, and probably a continual confession of truth from the spiritual world. And she's humbled to where she has to carry people on her back. It's important equally that the spirit be humbled and not just the personality. It has to be humbled before the divine, because in that way it itself becomes the pure radiance of the macrocosm beyond it. The resemblance of Pryderi to his father Pwyll is very striking, even though it's not possible at two to know that somebody looks exactly like their father unless you remember what they were like when they were two. I'm sure what they're talking about here is the microcosmic, macrocosmic, that this person is confirmed in the spirit. And there's the structure of their spiritual nature, whether it be the swaddling clothes in the etheric body, or whether it be in their strength of character, that they are confirmed and represent the truth of the initiate king. So there is a kind of microcosm, like a confirmation into a teleological spiritual religion here. Just about finished here. One more little thing. If the kingdom of earth, is to be regenerated, whether in humanity or not, this regeneration has to be foundational. One has to get to the very, very bottom of it. This means we have to be disillusioned of all of our pride, all of our self-conceit. We have to be humbled until we are at the absolute bottom. It's interesting in the language that in so many, if not all, cultural vehicles talking about initiation calls that to the point where, relative to our human nature, we are in despair. When Dante enters the passageway to the Inferno, he's at the gateway or the lintel of despair. We all have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death, where we despair our personal existence altogether. When Siegfried hammers together the sword, it is called Nothung, the courage of despair. And it's like saying that the name Prideri, which means relief from despair, is a restatement of that same fundamental principle. That when we allow ourselves to be humbled to the very lowest of all estates and are united with the Spirit, when we can say nothing good of ourselves personally for fear that more ego and pride can come in, only then can we rise up and only then can we be like Prideri. And that's it. Next time we'll start talking about Branwen. Did everybody get books? They're delightful, aren't they? I've got some tapes by him that are sensational. If you want to hear some of the tapes, they're the best oratorical use of poetry I've heard in my life. He is, of our generation of people, he is outstanding. Sort of like a poet's poet. You've heard them, haven't you? Yeah, good. All right. Thank you very much.